The German airship Hindenburg was the largest aircraft ever built in terms of its height, length, and volume. And when I say the largest, I mean more than 3 times longer than a Boeing 747 and only 80 feet shorter than the Titanic. It had 25 cabins for 2 passengers each, a restaurant, and a bar with a piano, everything you need for a long cruise. The airship was supposed to use helium to soar in the sky, but because of restrictions in the U.S., it had to be filled with flammable hydrogen. Between 1936 and 37, it made 63 flights, several over the Atlantic to the U.S. and South America. At 7:25 p.m. on May 6, 1937, as it was landing in New Jersey, the Hindenburg caught fire, and in just moments, it was completely covered in flames. The ship started to fall quickly. Seconds later, the tail of the Hindenburg crashed into the ground, and a burst of flame came out of its massive nose. What was left of the airship burned for several more hours. This tragedy took the lives of 35 out of the 97 people on board. Joseph Spa, an acrobat better known as Ben Dova, managed to survive the accident despite all odds, mainly thanks to his acrobatic skills. In his first year of transatlantic service, the Hindenburg airship made 10 successful trips to the United States from Germany and 7 trips between Germany and Brazil. It started the next year's season with a trip to Brazil in March. On May 3rd of the same year, it left Germany for the first of 10 planned round trips between Europe and the U.S. The trip across the Atlantic was uneventful, except for some strong winds that made the airship go slower than usual. The Hindenburg only had about half its full capacity of passengers, 36 instead of 70, and 61 crew members. The airship was already running late when it flew over Boston on the morning of May 6th. It was supposed to land at Lakehurst, New Jersey, but bad weather caused further delays. Captain Max Pruss heard about the thunderstorms and decided to fly over Manhattan, New York. People ran outside to see the giant airship floating over the city. By 6:22 p.m., the storms had cleared, and the Hindenburg headed back to Lakehurst to land. Since the airship was almost half a day late, there wasn't enough time to prepare it for the next trip to Europe, and the public wasn't allowed to visit or come aboard during its stay. Around 7 p.m., the Hindenburg was floating at 650 feet in the air and was about to do a special kind of landing called a flying moor. The airship would drop ropes from high up and then be slowly pulled down to the ground. This landing would need fewer people on the ground to help, but it would take longer than usual. A few minutes later, the wind suddenly changed, and the captain had to turn the airship sharply to keep it on track, but it still wasn't perfectly balanced. At 7:21 p.m., the Hindenburg was floating at 295 feet in the air when the crew dropped its ropes to start the landing. As the ground crew grabbed the ropes, a light rain started to fall. A couple of minutes later, some people noticed the fabric of the airship was rippling, as if gas was leaking. Others saw a dim blue flame, which might have been static electricity or a rare natural phenomenon called St. Elmo's fire. Moments later, flames erupted on top of the ship near the back. Inside the airship, people heard a soft blast, and those at the front felt a jolt. The officers in charge at first thought the shock was from a rope snapping, but soon realized something much worse was happening. The Hindenburg caught fire, and it was spreading quickly. Soon the back of the ship collapsed. 2 tanks with either water or fuel inside blew up out of the ship's body. The front part of the Hindenburg started to lurch upwards, while the back broke and began to fall. All of this happened while news crews were filming, but no footage shows exactly when the fire began. One of the survivors of the accident was Joseph Spa. He was a professional vaudeville comic acrobat whose family emigrated from Strasbourg, France to Long Island, New York when he was a kid. At the moment of the accident, he was sitting in the portside dining salon. He immediately realized he had no time to spare and smashed the window with his movie camera. He had it in his hands, prepared to film the landing. Then he leaned out of the window and held on to the window ledge. When the ship came close to the ground, about 20 feet up, he let go and jumped to the ground. He knew how to land safely, so he kept his feet under him. Even though he hurt his ankle, he survived the fire and the fall. Joseph started crawling away from the airship when a sailor slung him over his shoulder and helped to get him to safety. There, his family was already waiting for him. Later, some of the Hindenburg crew members accused Joseph Spa of sabotaging the ship. The reason for this was that they had caught the acrobat going by himself to the back of the ship several times to feed his dog, Eula. He wasn't allowed to do it and got scorned by the chief steward. The place where the dog was kept was close to where the fire started. So, some people thought Spa could have used those visits to sneak in and plant something that would cause an explosion. A few stewards also mentioned they noticed Spa had been really mad because of the delayed landing. But he had been away from his family for months, so he probably just wanted to get home quickly. When the acrobat learned about these suspicions, he was so shocked he nearly fell off the ladder he was standing on to clean windows. In the end, there was no proof that he was guilty of anything. The family doctor recommended Joseph take up ice skating to regain strength faster. So, once he recovered, he started performing his most famous bend-over act on ice. We still don't know for sure what caused the fire and blast inside the Hindenburg airship. It was most likely a discharge of atmospheric electricity that ignited the hydrogen gas cells. Zeppelin airships didn't stop their flights right after the tragedy. But by the end of the 1930s, airplanes had become way more popular and safer than airships. Airships, with their slow speeds, the high risk of trouble in stormy weather, and the difficulty in supplying them with helium, became completely outdated. The Hindenburg accident did have a huge effect on the future of the aviation industry. It focused on using materials that wouldn't catch fire so easily. Scientists invented new foolproof and self-extinguishing fabrics and insulation. They also stopped using dangerous hydrogen gas in airships and switched to much safer helium. To make sure fires could be put out quickly, engineers created special systems to detect and suppress fires. They improved emergency exits and safety tools like floor lights and escape slides with the new emergency response protocol, the 90-second evacuation rule. It requires airplanes to be designed in such a way that passengers and crew can evacuate within 90 seconds in case of an emergency. Now, speaking of crew, from that point on, they would need to take a mandatory training program to learn basic firefighting techniques and be prepared for possible crisis situations during the flight. The Federal Aviation Administration was established in 1958. They started doing risk assessments for planes to make sure they were safe before they would be allowed to transport passengers. They also introduced black box recording devices to make it easier to investigate the reasons for accidents and analyze that data to prevent new tragedies. Plus, they started to strictly control the transportation of hazardous materials, such as flammable liquids and gases. This could have been one of the biggest disasters in aviation history. It was close to midnight at San Francisco International Airport when Air Canada Flight 759 approached for landing. The pilots were almost done for that day and thought they'd land as usual, but they were unaware that the airport looked different that night. Runway 28 right was open, while runway 28 left, usually parallel, was closed for maintenance, with its lights turned off. Despite having landed here before, the pilots made a critical error. Expecting to see two parallel runways, they mistook the center runway for the darkened 28 left and assumed the taxiway on the right was 28 right. What the crew didn't realize was that the taxiway wasn't empty. 4 planes were lined up there, waiting for takeoff, with more than 1,000 passengers in total, and their plane was headed straight toward them. There was a notice to airmen, which listed important details for flights, including this critical information. But these notices are long and dense, often stretching several pages, and the closure detail had been missed by the Air Canada crew. That night, the pilots were conducting a visual approach, relying on what they could see to align with the runway. This is normal in good weather, but is much harder at night. The crew had flown from Toronto and were tired after a long day. Their internal clocks were already past 3 a.m., and Canadian rules regarding pilot rest were less strict than those in the U.S. The captain had been working for nearly 19 hours without proper rest. As the plane got closer to danger, no one in the cockpit noticed they were on the wrong path. Planes approaching San Francisco often come in at a slight angle to reduce noise over the bay. It's normal for them to appear slightly off to air traffic controllers. But this added to the confusion, and the Air Canada crew kept heading toward the taxiway. When the pilots finally realized that something was off, they radioed the control tower to confirm their landing clearance. The controller, who was managing both air traffic and ground operations due to the late hour, took several seconds to respond. He cleared them to land, unaware that the plane was lined up for the wrong path. Meanwhile, the crew of one of the planes on the runway quickly radioed the tower, alerting them to the imminent danger. The tower immediately instructed the Air Canada crew to stop and go around for another attempt. The Air Canada pilots pulled up just in time, missing the parked planes by just a couple feet. The pilots, still shaken from the near miss, saved hundreds of lives. After the incident, a full investigation was conducted. Now, there are new safety measures, but there are still concerns about whether the lessons learned are enough. Recent years have seen an alarming rise in such awful close calls. Qantas Flight 32, a scheduled flight from London to Sydney via Singapore, encountered a critical emergency on November 4, 2010. Just minutes after taking off from Singapore's Changi Airport, as an Airbus A380 was flying over the Riau Islands in Indonesia, it encountered a serious problem. One of its 4 engines underwent an uncontained failure. For the next 2 hours, the crew faced a tense and difficult situation as they tried to figure out how badly the plane was damaged. The accident happened at 10:01 a.m. Singapore time. When the engine went off, pieces of it flew into the wing, damaging important systems. The fuel system was hit, causing leaks and even starting a fire in one of the fuel tanks. It also took out one of the plane's hydraulic systems, which help control things like the flaps and landing gear. It disabled the anti-lock brakes, which are crucial for safe landings. 2 of the other engines started to lose power as well, and the flaps, which help control the plane's descent and speed, were damaged. Despite the harm to the aircraft, the crew realized it was still controllable. They decided to circle near Singapore for about 50 minutes while they carefully checked the condition of the aircraft. The first officer and the supervising captain then used a special landing calculator to see if they could land safely at Changi, even though the plane was 50 tons heavier than its maximum landing weight. At first, the system couldn't give them a landing distance, but after adjusting for the fact that the runway was dry, it showed they could land with only 328 feet of runway left to spare. At 11:45 a.m., the plane landed safely at Changi Airport, but because it was going about 40 miles per hour faster than usual, 4 of its tires blew out when it touched down. After landing, the crew ran into another problem. They couldn't shut off the number 1 engine. Emergency crews had to step in and put out the engine themselves. The crew had to decide whether to evacuate the plane right away because fuel was leaking near the overheated brakes, which could have caused a fire. Captain David Evans later explained that, despite the risk, it was actually safer to keep everyone on board until things settled down. The cabin crew stayed on high alert, ready to evacuate passengers immediately if the situation got worse. To make things even tougher, the plane was running on battery power, which meant they could only use 1 radio to communicate with emergency services. Luckily, the danger passed, and everyone was able to leave the plane calmly using a set of stairs. Everyone on board, 440 passengers and 29 crew members, got out safely. On the ground in Batam, some debris from the engine fell on a school, houses, and a car, but thankfully, everyone was okay there as well. Just a few missteps could have made that situation turn out very differently, but luckily the crew handled it like heroes. Investigators eventually found that the problem started because a small oil pipe in the engine had been poorly made, leading to the disaster. This was the first time an engine failure like this had happened on an A380. It was, and still is, the world's largest passenger plane at the time. As a result, Qantas and some other airlines temporarily grounded all of its A380 planes to ensure they were safe. Another similar incident happened with Northwest Airlines Flight 85 in 2002. The plane took off from Detroit Metropolitan Airport at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There were 4 pilots on board. About 7 hours into the flight, flying at 35,000 feet, an unexpected issue struck. The plane veered sharply, banking to the left. The pilots initially thought an engine had failed. The senior captain quickly returned to the cockpit and took manual control. An emergency was declared, and they decided to divert the flight to Anchorage. It was hard to communicate, as they were in a zone with weak signals. Eventually, they connected with another Northwest Airlines flight nearby, which relayed their emergency call to Alaska. The situation was so unusual that none of the usual emergency procedures worked. The flight crew called Northwest Airlines headquarters in Minneapolis for help, but even they couldn't find a solution. Thankfully, the pilots worked together to control the plane. They managed to steer the plane using the ailerons, and by applying more power to one engine than the other. This tricky maneuver allowed them to land safely at Anchorage. After the incident, the NTSB and Boeing investigated once again. The NTSB investigator described it as a dramatic event that required careful examination. They found a crack in the power control module for the rudder, which had caused part of its metal housing to break. This break was unusual because it affected the module's outer casing, not just the inside parts. The NTSB concluded that the crack led to what's known as a rudder hardover, where the rudder is pushed to its maximum position and stays there, causing the sudden dangerous turn. All of these horrible situations show how fatigue, miscommunication, and outdated procedures can lead to disasters. But the sheer number of them in history, especially in U.S. airports, raises the question of whether enough lessons have truly been learned. The plane broke into 3 large pieces and crashed onto the hillside, scattering parts all over the snowy ground. The wings ripped off, and the main body of the aircraft split into 2 parts. Flames crackled from what was left of the airplane. 7 out of 9 crew members survived the crash. They were all part of the 1946 U.S. mission to map the Antarctic continent. There were 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and 4,700 people to do the job. They only had 2 months of summer down there before the weather got too bad. USS Pine Island took 3 seaplanes on their mission. One of the planes, called George 1, had a crew of 9 people. They went on their first 10-hour mission. Later, when it was time for the second flight, the weather got worse, with stormy seas and low visibility. But they decided to take the chance and fly anyway. It was supposed to be an epic adventure, and even the captain of Pine Island joined the expedition. The pilot, Ralph Frenchy LeBlanc, was very experienced and not worried about the weather. The plane was tied to some small boats, but the waves were so strong that the lines holding it were damaging the plane's metal body. Crew members had to attach 4 special rocket boosters, called jet-assisted takeoff bottles, to help the plane lift off. It managed to do so after a run of about 5 miles, but got straight into a blinding snowstorm. James Robbie Robbins was just 19 years old back then, but already had 1,500 hours of experience as a radar operator in that type of seaplane. He once successfully flew 9 hours through thick fog and clouds in Greenland, so he trusted his abilities. The radar showed a mountain range 20 miles ahead and icebergs spread out, and it was all correct. They had to stay low to take photos for mapping, and it was impossible in bad weather. So the pilot decided to turn the plane around to head back to the ship. Suddenly, the plane hit something. At the time, they didn't know what it was, but later they realized it was a snow-covered ridge that was hidden and couldn't be seen on radar. The loud bang shocked everyone on board. The pilot and co-pilot quickly pushed the plane's controls to try to lift it back into the sky. But just a few seconds later, the fuel tank in the front of the plane blew up. Collapsing with a ridge likely cracked one of the fuel tanks, so the gas started to leak. The fumes from the gas might have been set on fire by an electrical spark or the plane's hot engines. The blast was so strong that it broke the plane into 3 parts. The pilot was hurt and stuck upside down in the burning front part of the aircraft. Some of the other men were also badly injured. Some crawled out of the wreckage, and others had been thrown out into the snow during the crash. Most of them couldn't even remember the bang or the impact. The crew managed to pull the trapped pilot out of the wreckage and put him into a sleeping bag inside the back part of the plane. They also tried to help Frederick Williams, who was severely injured. They placed him on a piece of debris to keep him still and wrapped him in blankets to keep him warm. Unfortunately, even though they did their best to take care of them, Williams passed away a few hours later. Sadly, the navigator and the radio man didn't survive the crash either. 3 crew members had only one blanket, so they took turns staying in the middle where it was warmer. For the first 3 days, the weather was really bad. It snowed a lot, and the sky was super dark and cloudy. The crew started looking through the wreckage for anything useful. Near what used to be the back part of the plane, they found 3 big boxes of pemmican. It's a kind of emergency food that has everything you need to stay healthy, but it's not the most delicious food on Earth. Each box had about 100 paper cups filled with this special food. They also found better food in the flight rations. There were steaks, potatoes, canned veggies, bread, butter, salt, pepper, sugar, canned milk, a few cookies, and even 2 big cans of peanut butter. They had enough food to last for a while, and they figured the pemmican would help them get through the long, dark winter if necessary. All of the fresh food was hidden in the snow, where the kitchen used to be, so they had to dig it out. They got most of the sugar by licking it off the snow and separating it by taste. The crew also found a small 2-burner stove in the emergency supplies, but they didn't have any fuel. Luckily, the plane had some fuel left in the tanks, so they tapped one of the lines and had enough to last a long time. They kept the burners constantly on to melt snow to fill 2 or 3 water holders that held about 4 or 5 gallons each. It seemed like it took 15 or 20 pots of snow to fill just 1 cup of water. After 3 days, the weather got better, the sky was clear, and the sun was shining brightly. From where they were, they could see the ocean down the hill. While exploring the wreckage, they found more sleeping bags, a camera with film, and other supplies like a sled and a life raft made for 9 people. Days went by, and the sun never went down. Huge, hungry seagulls hanging out right next to the wreck were getting on everyone's nerves. To distract themselves a bit, the crew played an old Navy game called Salvo. It's like a battleships game for 2 players, where your task is to find and defeat all the ships of your rival. They also took some photos of everyone and the wreck from different angles with a Brownie box camera they had on the plane. The radar man painted big yellow letters on the airplane's wings with the names of the deceased crew members to make sure rescuers knew what had happened. On the 13th day, a rescue plane finally showed up. Everyone shouted, waved, and did everything to get the pilot's attention, but the plane didn't stop and kept flying. 2 hours later, it came back, and Robbins, in a hurry, threw fuel onto a pile of flammable stuff to set it on fire. The bang was so big, it burned his eyebrows, but it worked. The plane turned and flew toward them, wiggling its wings as a sign it saw them. The pilot dropped a note attached to a weight. It said, "If you can walk to the lake, make a circle. If not, form a straight line." The lake was 10 miles away, but they knew they had no choice but to get there, and so they made a circle, signaling that they were ready for rescue. Then they got to work. They stacked sleeping bags on a sled and placed their injured pilot on top. Robbins took a compass from the crashed plane and attached it to the sled's handlebars to help guide them. 3 men pulled the sled while another walked behind, making sure they stayed on track. The snow was so deep that they often sank up to their waists. The journey only got easier when they reached solid ground, so it took them 24 hours to walk the 10 miles to the shore. As they got close, a thick fog rolled in, so they couldn't see the rescue plane. But the pilot started the engines, and the crew followed the sound. Soon, 2 rescuers arrived in a raft and helped them paddle out to the waiting plane. They climbed aboard and flew back to their ship, the Pine Island. All the survivors were taken to the USS Philippine Sea and later returned home. For 6 of the 9 men who crashed on Thurston Island, life continued.
It has recently become a popular location for many tourists looking for the perfect place to get away from it all. If you're lucky enough to catch a sunny day here, it's like no other, I can assure you. Chances are, you'll end up having loads of foggy days, but let's be honest, they have a special allure of their own. This enchanting smile-shaped island is called Sable Island. It's located 190 miles from mainland Nova Scotia. It wasn't accessible to the general public until 2013. That's when it was added to the list of National Parks of Canada. You can get here either by plane or by water. But what's so enchanting about this place anyway? There must be something since the yearly tourist count is growing every year. Firstly, there's a spectacular number of wild horses here. There are between 200 and 500 horses roaming free all over the island. There's also a large population of gray seals. The place is also the only breeding location of a rare bird species called the Ipswich sparrow. If you're already considering a trip here, there are some things you need to know first. Remember that fog I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that Sable Island is the foggiest place in the Canadian Maritimes. I'm talking about approximately 127 foggy days each year. During such days, Sable Island literally disappears underneath a thick layer of fog. You won't be able to explore the place on your own either. The local regulations state that visitors need to travel within a group, and they also need to keep a 197-foot distance from the wildlife they can encounter here. As charming as this place may be, it holds a dark secret hidden beneath the sandy dunes, and it has nothing to do with beautiful creatures living here or the island's unique vegetation. Apart from being known from its horses and seals, Sable Island is infamous for an overwhelming number of shipwrecks. Over the years, about 350 ships have ended their lives here, on these sandbars. When survivors described their experiences, they usually mentioned harsh weather conditions near this mysterious island. The island also made its way into literature when it was described in a book called The Perfect Storm, which was written by Sebastian Junger and published in 1997. The book was so successful that it was later adapted for the big screen in 2000, with George Clooney playing the leading role. The first recorded shipwreck near Sable Island dates back to 1583. The boat was named the HMS Delight and was under the command of British adventurer and explorer Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Only 17 people managed to survive the catastrophe by escaping in a small boat. Records mention that they spent 7 days at sea before reaching the shores of Newfoundland. In 1884, another vessel named the Nicosia struggled in the thick fog as well. The ship was completely destroyed, but fortunately, all 18 crew members managed to survive. The captain's son was almost lost at sea when a lifeboat capsized when he was climbing into it. He somehow managed to stay underneath the lifeboat, which was completely submerged. When this lifeboat righted, he eventually emerged from the water and was rescued for the second time. The years between 1947 and 1999 were relatively quiet on the island. In 1999, though, a yacht called the Merrimack ran aground near the shore of the island at about 2 a.m. on July 27th. The 40-foot fiberglass boat had a crew of only 3 people. Natural gas exploration workers, who were luckily not far away, rescued them. The crew managed to fly safely to Halifax the next day. The owner of the Merrimack tried to recover his boat by hiring local fishermen. Unfortunately, this operation was unsuccessful, since only the fittings of the yacht were eventually saved. It took no more than 6 weeks for the sand and waves to crush and completely break up the hull of the Merrimack. So what is it about this place that's so dangerous for boats? Does it have anything to do with the weather? Or maybe there's other forces at play? The explanation turns out to be a bit more complex, and it wasn't easy to figure out, at least not way back in the 1500s. First of all, the island is located close to one of the world's richest fishing grounds. Since it's also near one of the major shipping routes between Europe and North America, hundreds of vessels sail past it each year. The likelihood of shipwreck increases when there are so many boats roaming around the area. Sable Island is also in the way of most of the storms that move up the Atlantic coast of North America. It's no surprise that boats often get hurtled straight onto the shores of this island. The weather has a lot to do with it too. During the summer season, the warm air from the Gulf Stream creates a dense fog as it merges with the cool air by the Labrador Current that passes by the island. Other currents don't help the matter. Sable Island is next to the meeting point of three major ocean currents: the Gulf Stream, the Labrador Current, and the Belle Isle Current. Since the 1950s, radars and other modern navigation tools have been used on commercial vessels as well. Up until then, the sextant was the main instrument used to figure out a ship's location. It doesn't mean that sextants weren't accurate, but this instrument couldn't work properly without a clear view of the sun or stars, which means it didn't help much in dense fog, such as the one surrounding Sable Island, or when it was cloudy. Often during bad weather, the captain of a ship navigated, relying on their experiences and intuition based on the ship's speed and direction. That's why most of the survivors in shipwrecks near Sable Island said that the captain had simply miscalculated the ship's position, crashing into Sable Island by accident. This dusty, sandy land is as unfriendly to ships as it is to trees. There's reportedly a single tree on the whole island, and it looks a lot more like a bush. It's actually a pine tree. And since the famous island horses don't see it as much of a food source, it somehow managed to survive. Reports say that the tree was planted back in the 1950s. Local authorities were trying to grow a forest on the island to make it a bit more welcoming. They've planted tens of thousands of trees over the years, more than 69,000 evergreens, 600 fruit trees, and about 55 pounds of pine seeds, along with other plants which could survive the conditions on the island. But they were no match for the extreme weather and sandy soil. Out of all those plants, just one pine tree is still alive. Thanks to its resistance, it has even become a symbol of Sable Island. Interestingly, for around 40 years, the island also had just one inhabitant. Can you imagine that? One person living on a remote island for so many decades? It's the story of a woman called Zoe Lucas. She chose to surround herself with the only residents on the island: the horses, the gray seals, and the many species of birds. An esteemed naturalist, she mentioned in an interview she gave back in 2017 that she was used to living on the island and that she never got lonely. To survive here, she had to put together an essentials kit. It included a notebook to take notes and a pair of binoculars to study the wildlife. You can safely assume she wasn't scared of the intimidating surroundings, since she decided to eventually call this place home. At first, Zoe wanted to set up camp on one end of the island, near some abandoned buildings. But eventually, she settled in a wooden house near a bunch of sand dunes. A Canadian institution called the Meteorological Service of Canada put together the simple construction back in the 1940s. Parks Canada operates the building these days. Zoe's work included gathering as much data on the local horse population as possible. It could help scientists better understand how they managed to adapt to the unfriendly environment. She also helped gather the debris that made it to the shore to help track pollution levels. Among all the rubbish that she collected, there was a refrigerator and a crate full of fresh peppers. Some other specialists eventually started working rotating shifts on Sable Island to offer the brave woman a little bit of company now and then. Airplanes are unanimously accepted as the world's safest transport. The chances of a crash are super slim. But sometimes you don't even need to board it to say goodbye to your friends and family forever. In Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, someone lost their life after being literally sucked into the running engine of a plane. KLM Royal Dutch Airlines shared the details, revealing that the unfortunate incident involved a plane scheduled to fly to Denmark. KLM confirmed that during a routine operation, a person found themselves in the path of a running aircraft engine, leading to a fatal outcome. They also mentioned they're offering support to the passengers and staff who witnessed the horrifying event. As of now, there's been no word on who the victim was or whether they were a passenger, an airport employee, or just someone nearby. But what we need to learn from this tragic incident is that it's essential to keep a great distance from the turbine. Yeah, traveling is not only about relaxation and positive emotions. It can be about ultimate danger, and even the simplest actions can put your life at risk. I won't make it long. Just remember one thing. Never, ever pose for photos in proximity to the rocks. A 20-year-old guy named Roni Joshua Simanjutak was swept out to sea by a huge wave while trying to snap some vacation pics with his friends. They were all just hanging out on the beach in East Java, Indonesia, when Roni decided it would be a good idea to take a picture with the crashing waves at Kedung Tumpang Beach. Things started off pretty chill. The water was calm, and some of his friends were swimming near the massive rocks. But then, out of nowhere, the calm waters turned chaotic. As Roni poses for the camera, a massive wave suddenly rises behind him. It hits him hard, knocking him down onto the rocks and dragging him into the rough surf. At first, some onlookers laugh as he stumbles, but that quickly changes when he disappears under the water. Later in the video, the person filming zooms in on something floating away, which people believe might be Roni. It's a gut-wrenching sight, as it appears to be his body being pulled out to sea. Authorities were looking for him for some time, yet all was in vain. The waves measured between 6.5 and 14 feet, making the rescue efforts really tough, according to a spokesperson from the Indonesia's National Search and Rescue Agency. In October 2024, Roni was still missing. Ew, what's that? Not gonna lie, this flesh-resembling spot looks disgusting, at least to me. It's a lion's mane jellyfish, and not only does it look off, but it's also terribly dangerous. One touch can get you into serious trouble. Now, don't get too scared. You're unlikely to see this anywhere except for Australia. Lion's mane jellyfish are among the largest in the world, with some growing over a meter wide and having tentacles that can stretch over 32 feet. These jellyfish can deliver a sting that brings instant pain, although it's not life-threatening. Scientists claim that while lion's manes aren't the most toxic jellyfish out there, their sting can certainly hurt, especially for kids. Also, when traveling to exotic locations, make sure to keep your ears open, especially if you know there are volcanoes nearby. The pulsating sound can tell you beforehand that there's a volcano ready to erupt. A couple's trip to Iceland took an unexpected turn when they had to evacuate Blue Lagoon due to a volcano warning. They thought they were in for a relaxing day at the famous spa when the alarms suddenly went off because of nearby volcanic activity. When the couple checked in, the staff warned them about a possible eruption and told them to gather their things if they heard alarms, but they figured it was just a precaution. So, when the alarm actually sounded, the couple was completely taken aback. There was smoke, lava, ashes. They saw it all, and they even managed to share a video on TikTok, which got 9.3 million views. Thankfully, they made it back to their cruise ship. The couple was on an epic Royal Caribbean cruise that stopped in Iceland as part of a 9-month global journey. Good news, according to the travelers, the staff at Blue Lagoon made the evacuation quick and calm. So they're real professionals. The eruption happened on August 22, 2024, on the Reykjanes Peninsula and marked the 6th volcanic event in the area since December. Now, I know that water is life, but not all forms of life are friendly. Some of them can be pretty hostile. A swimmer had a super chill run-in with a giant eel while taking a dip off the coast of Jupiter, Florida. So what should you do if you see one? Just back up. Don't get too excited or nervous. Just back up without drawing too much attention to you. The eel in question wasn't being aggressive at all. It was just curious. But in general, moray eels, and that's the one they saw, can bite if startled. Thankfully, their bites aren't lethal. But anyways, who wants to be bitten in the middle of a peaceful swim? Boy, look at that! This lady's feet are purple! If you wonder how this is related to trips, well, that's simple. The lady got her feet and ankles like that during her trip to Mexico. And this looks by no means healthy. So what exactly happened to her? Initially, she thought it was just a bad sunburn, but nope. It turned out to be a severe allergic reaction. These can throw a wrench in your vacation plans, so make sure to pack a health kit with all the needed meds, especially those that might be hard to find where you're going. When traveling, it's also smart to be cautious about what you eat. Contaminated food or drinks can lead to some pretty unpleasant issues. The main tip here is to stick to hot foods, which are usually safe, as well as packaged snacks and bottled or canned drinks. You should keep an eye on both your health and your belongings while traveling, because even the rich and famous get robbed easily. The 2024 Paris Olympics grabbed attention not just for the sports, but also for a high-profile theft that left a Qatari princess empty-handed when her pricey Hermes Birkin bags went missing. This incident, reported by French media, happened on July 28th while she was traveling on a TGV train from Nice to Paris, getting ready for the Olympics. Al-Mayasa bint Hamad Al-Thani, who is either the Emir of Qatar's sister-in-law or sister, lost her stash of luxury bags, which were said to be filled with diamonds and expensive watches. She was traveling with just her maid and no security, which raised eyebrows about her safety measures for such valuable items. After realizing the bags were gone, staff on the train tried to help, stopping for about 20 minutes at the Toulon station to look for them, but they came up empty. Authorities believe the thief might have escaped in Toulon, and the local criminal court is launching an investigation. French officials were tight-lipped about the investigation, and there were no updates on the value of the stolen items. Meanwhile, the French National Railway Company reminded everyone that they aren't responsible for lost or stolen belongings. It's up to passengers to keep an eye on their stuff. A travel influencer had quite the jaw-dropping experience when he stumbled upon what he dubbed a Jurassic Park dinosaur, chilling in his hotel pool during a trip to Bali. He captured in a video a massive reptile making itself at home in his pool in Congo. The influencer in question, Daniel Thomason from Norway, later found out it was actually a water lizard related to the Komodo dragon, but significantly smaller and less dangerous. He was shocked to learn it was just a baby, since the adults can grow up to 6.5 feet long. Komodo dragons are the largest lizards on the planet, mostly found on Komodo Island and a few nearby areas in Indonesia. They can grow up to 10 feet long and weigh around 300 pounds.